In a land where survival meant keeping to your own kind, one woman's compassion in the dark of night forever altered her destiny. When Miriam Blake found a wounded Apache warrior behind her barn, she had a choice: scream for help or offer her hand.
I'm not afraid of you. Let me help you.
His silence spoke volumes, but his eyes never left hers. When dawn broke, thunder rolled across the plains, but it wasn't rain coming.
You gave me life when others would have taken it. Now I offer you mine.
A single act of mercy sparked a love that would defy two worlds. But as Miriam found herself torn between the only home she'd known and the man who awakened her heart, forces gathered to destroy their forbidden bond.
They'll have to shoot me too because I'm standing with you, with our people.
My heart is yours, Miriam Blake, as the stars belong to the night sky.
When hatred threatens to tear them apart, will their love be strong enough to bridge the divide between two worlds? Or will blood be spilled in the name of keeping them separate? Before we begin this epic tale, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on Miriam Blake's back as she hauled another bucket of water from the well to the small vegetable patch behind her family's weathered cabin. Sweat trickled down her neck, dampening the faded blue cotton dress that had once belonged to her mother. At 24, Miriam had spent more years than she cared to count working this thankless patch of scrubland just east of Tucson. "Miriam," her father's harsh voice called from inside the cabin. "Where's my whiskey?" She sighed, setting down the bucket beside a wilting tomato plant. Her father, Frank Blake, hadn't been sober since her mother died of fever 3 winters ago. These days, he barely acknowledged her, except to demand food or drink. "Coming, Pa," she called back, wiping her hands on her apron. Inside the dim cabin, Frank slouched at the rough-hewn table, his eyes bloodshot and angry. "Took you long enough," he muttered, as she placed the bottle before him. "The garden needs water," she said simply, "if we want to eat next month." He grunted, already pouring himself another drink. Miriam turned away, used to his silence. He hadn't called her by name in weeks, as if speaking it might conjure up memories of her mother, Sarah, whom folks said Miriam resembled more with each passing year. Later that evening, after a quiet supper of beans and cornbread that her father barely touched, Miriam went to check on the chickens. The hens needed to be locked up safe at night. Coyotes had been bold lately, and she couldn't afford to lose any more of her small flock. The night was still, with only the chirp of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote breaking the silence. The moon hung heavy and yellow over the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard. As she latched the chicken coop door, a sound stopped her cold, a low groan coming from behind the shed. Her heart pounded. Bandits weren't uncommon in these parts. Neither were wild animals or desperate drifters. She picked up a sturdy stick and inched around the corner of the shed. What she saw made her gasp. A man lay crumpled in the dirt, his breathing shallow. Not just any man, an Apache warrior. His long black hair was matted with dirt and blood, and his side was dark with what could only be a gunshot wound. His eyes, black as thunderclouds, opened at her approach, fixing her with a stare that was both pained and defiant. Miriam nearly screamed, nearly ran. The stories about Apache raids had terrified her since childhood, but something in his face rooted her in place. He was hurt, dying maybe, and no matter what her father or the townsfolk said about Indians, she couldn't just leave a man to die in her yard. "Don't move," she whispered. "I'll be right back." Inside, she gathered clean rags, a bottle of whiskey from her father's stash, and some of the bread from supper. Her hands shook as she filled a cup with water. If her father woke and found her helping an Apache, there'd be hell to pay. Back outside, the warrior hadn't moved, but his eyes followed her every move as she knelt beside him. Up close, she could see he was young, maybe not much older than her. His chest was bare except for a leather necklace with a small pouch attached. "This will hurt," she warned, pouring some whiskey on a rag. When she pressed it to his wound, he didn't flinch, though she saw his jaw tighten. She cleaned the wound as best she could, finding that the bullet had gone straight through. A lucky thing, her mother would have said. Miriam worked in silence, tearing strips of cloth to bind the wound. She offered him water, which he drank greedily, and then the bread, which he took with a steady hand. "You're safe here tonight," she said, not sure if he understood English, "but you can't stay. My pa..." She didn't finish the thought. The warrior watched her, his expression unreadable. He never spoke, never thanked her, but his eyes never left hers, as if memorizing her face. When she had done all she could, Miriam returned to the cabin. She lay awake most of the night, wondering what would happen when dawn came. Would he still be there? Would he tell others where he'd found help? Would he remember the girl with trembling hands who hadn't run away? Morning came with a strange stillness. Miriam slipped out early, before her father woke, and hurried to the shed. The spot where the warrior had lain was empty. Only a small bloodstain in the dirt proved he had been there at all. He had vanished like morning mist. Throughout the day, Miriam found herself glancing toward the distant hills where the Apache were said to make their camps. She wondered if he had made it back, if he was alive, if he remembered the girl who had helped him. The next day dawned clear, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Miriam was hanging laundry when she heard it, a sound like distant thunder. But the sky remained cloudless. No rain coming today. She shaded her eyes and looked toward the hills. Dust rose in clouds, and then she saw them, dozens of Apache riders pouring over the ridge like ghosts coming to reclaim the land. Their horses' hides were painted with symbols she didn't understand, and the warriors carried spears and rifles that glinted in the sunlight. Fear seized her throat. Were they coming to raid? To kill her and her father for the meager possessions they had? She thought of running inside, of barring the door, but something kept her rooted in place. Curiosity, perhaps, or fate. The riders approached, and she could now make out the one at the front, an older woman with long grey braids adorned with silver beads. Behind her rode a familiar figure, the wounded warrior, now sitting tall and proud on his horse, dressed in fresh buckskin, his wound covered with red ochre paint. He pointed directly at Miriam. The tribe drew to a halt before her cabin. In eerie silence, they dismounted. One by one they approached, laying offerings at her feet, necklaces strung with turquoise stones, blankets woven with patterns she'd never seen before, baskets filled with mesquite bread, and a young colt with a white blaze on its forehead. Last came a beautiful sash, intricately woven with red and black threads. The elder woman took it from a young girl and presented it to Miriam. "A wedding sash," the woman said in perfect English, surprising Miriam. "A token given only when a man sees a woman as more than a savior." Miriam stood speechless, the soft fabric of the sash in her hands. "He could have died," the elder woman continued, gesturing to the warrior who now stood beside her. "But you gave him life. Now, we give you back what you gave him." The warrior, the one she had saved, stepped forward. Up close, his presence was even more powerful. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he looked at her. "My son, Toya," the elder woman said. "It means silent river in your tongue. He says you showed courage when others would have shown fear." Before Miriam could respond, the cabin door banged open. Her father stood there, rifle in hand, his face twisted with rage and fear. "Get away from her, you savages," he shouted, raising the gun. "Pa, no," Miriam cried. "They're not here to hurt us." But it was too late. Word of the Apache visit spread through town like wildfire. By sundown, Sheriff Wilson and a group of men had arrived at the Blake cabin. "We heard you had visitors, Frank," the sheriff said, eyeing the gift still laid out in the yard. "Apache visitors." "It wasn't like that," Miriam tried to explain. "They came to thank me. I helped one of them who was hurt." The sheriff's face hardened. "You harbored an Apache. Girl, do you have any idea what those savages are capable of?" "They were grateful," she insisted. "They brought gifts." "Bribes, more like," one of the men spat. "Trying to get information about the town." Her father, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly erupted. "You stupid girl, you've brought shame on this family. Helping those devils who killed so many good folks." "Pa, please." "Sheriff," Frank said, his voice cold with anger, "you can tell the town my daughter doesn't speak for me. I want nothing to do with Apache lovers." That night, after the sheriff and his men had gone, her father's rage only grew with each glass of whiskey he emptied. "Your mother would be ashamed," he slurred, pacing the small cabin. "No daughter of mine consorts with savages." "I helped a wounded man," Miriam said firmly, "like Ma would have done." "Don't you dare speak of her!" he roared, sweeping his arm across the table, sending dishes crashing to the floor. Get out of my house." Miriam stood her ground. "This is my home too." "Not anymore," he said, his voice suddenly quiet, and all the more frightening for it. "Take your Indian trinkets and get out. You're no daughter of mine." With tears streaming down her face, Miriam gathered what few possessions she could carry. Her mother's shawl, a small book of poetry, the gifts from the Apache. Outside, the night was cool and clear, the stars impossibly bright. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The town would side with her father, especially after today. She made her way to the barn, thinking she could at least sleep there for the night. But as she approached, a shadow separated itself from the darkness. Her heart leapt to her throat until she recognized the silhouette. Toya, the silent river, had returned. He stood before her, tall and straight, his eyes reflecting the starlight. He offered his hand, palm up, a question in the gesture. "They've thrown me out," she said simply, not knowing if he understood. "My father, the town, they don't want me anymore." Toya nodded, as if he had expected this. He pointed to the distant hills, then back to her, his meaning clear. Miriam looked back at the cabin that had been her home all her life, then to the unknown wilderness beyond. Fear and wonder battled within her. Could she trust this man who spoke no words but whose eyes held promises? Could she find a place among a people she didn't understand? As if reading her thoughts, Toya stepped closer. Slowly, deliberately, he took the wedding sash that she still clutched in her hands. With gentle movements, he wrapped it around her waist, tying it with care. His eyes never left hers as he completed this ceremony of intention. The message was unmistakable. He was offering her more than escape. He was offering her a future. Miriam took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of two worlds. Behind her lay everything familiar, however painful. Before her stretched the unknown, frightening but somehow full of promise. In the stillness of the night, with only the stars as witness, Miriam Blake made her choice. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Miriam rode behind Toya on his sturdy paint horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. They had traveled through the night, following trails invisible to her eyes, climbing higher into the hills where the Apache made their home. Her decision to leave had been made in a moment of desperation, but with each mile that passed, a strange sense of calm settled over her. There was no turning back now. The Apache camp appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge, a collection of wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings covered with brush and grass, arranged in a circle around a central clearing. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played between the structures. Dogs barked at their approach, alerting the camp to visitors. As they rode in, people emerged from their homes, watching curiously. Miriam felt their stares and held tighter to Toya. He placed a reassuring hand over hers, but remained silent as always. The elder woman, Toya's mother, Nijoni, approached as they dismounted. She wore the same silver-beaded braids and a dress of soft buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork. Her face was weathered but kind as she looked at Miriam. "You have chosen to come," she said, her English clear and precise. "This is good." "My father threw me out," Miriam admitted. "The town thinks I betrayed them by helping your son." Nijoni nodded slowly. "The white man's ways are strange to us. To refuse help to one who suffers, this we do not understand." She gestured to a nearby wickiup. "You will stay with me until you learn our ways. My son has chosen you, but there is much you must know first." Toya dismounted and spoke to his mother in their language, the first time Miriam had heard his voice. It was deep and smooth, like water over stones. Nijoni listened, then nodded. "My son says you have courage," she translated. "He says your hands were gentle even when they trembled with fear." Miriam blushed, unsure how to respond to such direct praise. "Come," Nijoni said, taking Miriam's hand. "You must be hungry and tired." The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences. Miriam slept on a bed of soft furs in Nijoni's wickiup, ate unfamiliar foods, and struggled to understand the language spoken around her. The women of the tribe watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The children were less reserved, often following her around, touching her light brown hair with wonder. Toya kept his distance during these early days, watching from afar as she adjusted to her new surroundings. Each morning, he would nod to her before riding out with the other warriors. Each evening, he would return and sit across the fire from her, his eyes reflecting the flames as he listened to his mother teaching Miriam simple Apache words. On her fourth day in the camp, a young woman named Kasa approached Miriam as she struggled to grind corn for the day's bread. "You do it wrong," Kasa said in broken English, demonstrating the proper technique. "Like this." Miriam copied her movements, grateful for the help. "Thank you. I have much to learn." Kasa smiled, revealing dimples in her cheeks. "Toya is my cousin. He never bring white woman before, you special." "I just helped him when he was hurt," Miriam said. Kasa shook her head. "No, many could help, only you did." She pointed to the wedding sash that Miriam still wore. "This mean he see your spirit, not just your kindness." That evening, as Miriam sat with Nijoni mending a tear in one of the older woman's dresses, she found the courage to ask about Toya. "Why doesn't he speak to me?" Nijoni's hands stilled on her work. "My son speaks when words are needed. With you, he feels they are not." She set her sewing aside. "When Toya was a boy, he nearly drowned in the river. For many days he did not speak. The medicine man said the river spirits had claimed his voice, but given him wisdom in return." She smiled at some distant memory. "He became Toya, silent river, deep, powerful, saying much without words. He was shot when I found him," Miriam said. "How did that happen?" Nijoni's face darkened. "The cavalry. They came to our old camp, looking for men to blame for cattle raids along the border. My husband and my eldest son, Ki, stood to protect our people." Her voice grew tight with old pain. "They killed them both. Toya was wounded but escaped to warn us. We moved our camp that night. Somehow he found his way to your home." "I'm sorry," Miriam whispered, finally understanding the grief that lined Nijoni's face. "It is the way of things now," the older woman said. "But you are something new. A bridge, perhaps, between our worlds." The next morning, Miriam woke to find a small bundle outside the Wiki-Up entrance. Inside was a dress of soft buckskin, similar to those worn by the other women, and a pair of moccasins decorated with colorful beads. A note on a scrap of paper lay on top, written in a careful hand. "For new beginnings. T." Miriam held the dress against herself, touched by the gesture. When she emerged from the Wiki-Up wearing her new clothes, she found Toya waiting, holding the reins of 2 horses, his paint and the white-blazed colt that had been among the gifts from the tribe. "You want me to ride?" she asked, uncertain. He nodded, gesturing to the colt. The animal was young but calm, watching her with gentle eyes. "I don't know how," she admitted. For the first time, Toya smiled fully, a transformation that lit his entire face and made Miriam's heart beat faster. He motioned for her to come closer and began to show her how to approach the horse, how to let it get used to her scent, how to mount without startling it. By midday, Miriam was riding alongside Toya through a narrow canyon, the walls rising high on either side. They stopped at a small stream where wildflowers grew in surprising abundance. Toya dismounted and helped Miriam down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. He led her to a spot beside the stream and sat, indicating she should join him. From a pouch at his belt, he produced a handful of dried berries, offering them to her first. "Thank you," she said, taking a few. "For everything. The dress, the riding lesson, this place." Toya nodded, his eyes warm. He pointed to her, then to the wildflowers, then back to her. "You think I'm like the flowers," she guessed, "growing in an unlikely place?" He nodded again, pleased that she understood. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the stream and the occasional call of a bird overhead. After a while, Toya reached for a flat stone and began to scratch marks into it with the tip of his knife. "What are you doing?" Miriam asked, leaning closer. He showed her the stone. On it, he had drawn a simple picture of a woman with flowing hair, her, and beside it, a river, himself. "Oh," she breathed, understanding the message. Side by side, different, but flowing in the same direction. She took the stone, holding it carefully. No one had ever given her such a thoughtful gift, something that spoke of feelings too deep for casual words. To-ya watched her, his expression open and vulnerable for the first time. Slowly he reached out and touched her cheek, a question in his eyes. Miriam leaned into his touch, her answer clear. His hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer until their foreheads touched, an intimate gesture of connection. To-ya, she whispered his name for the first time. In response, he spoke a single word, Miriam. His voice was deep and sure, as if he had been saving her name for just this moment. Their return to camp was marked by a new awareness between them, a tentative bond beginning to form. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Mornings, Miriam worked with the women, learning to prepare food, tan hides, and weave baskets. Afternoons, To-ya would take her riding, showing her the territory of his people. Hidden springs, ancient caves with paintings on the walls, lookout points where you could see for miles in every direction. At night, around the community fire, she listened to the elders tell stories, with Nijoni translating the most important parts. She learned of the Apache creation, of the hero twins who slew monsters, of how the people came to this land long before the white settlers arrived. 2 weeks after her arrival, as Miriam knelt by a small plot of ground near Nijoni's wickiup, Casa approached. "What you do?" she asked, curious. "I'm planting roses," Miriam explained, showing the other woman the small cuttings she had taken from wild roses during one of her rides with To-ya. "My mother taught me how to grow them from scraps. They'll take root here, and by next spring there will be flowers." Casa crouched beside her, watching intently as Miriam demonstrated how to prepare the cuttings and plant them with care. "You teach me?" Casa asked. "Of course," Miriam smiled, handing her a cutting. "Here, you try." Soon several other women had gathered, watching the strange activity with interest. By the time the sun was high, a dozen rose cuttings had been planted, and Miriam had shown the women how to water and care for them. "In my old life I grew vegetables to survive," she told them, "but my mother always said, plant roses too, for beauty feeds the soul as surely as corn feeds the body." Nijoni, who had been watching from nearby, translated this for the others. The women nodded in understanding, and something shifted in their eyes as they looked at Miriam, a new respect perhaps, or the beginning of acceptance. That evening, as the tribe gathered for the evening meal, Nijoni stood and spoke to her people, gesturing to Miriam frequently. Though she couldn't understand the words, Miriam could feel their impact as the tribe members looked at her with new interest. "What did you say?" she asked Nijoni afterward. "I told them you bring new life to old earth," the elder woman replied, "that you teach us to find beauty even in hard times. This is a gift we respect." Later, as the fire burned low and most had retired to their wickiups, To-ya came to sit beside Miriam. He carried a small wooden flute, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. "Will you play?" she asked. He nodded, lifting the flute to his lips. The melody that emerged was haunting and sweet, rising and falling like the wind through canyon walls. Miriam closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she opened them again, she found To-ya watching her, his gaze intense. He lowered the flute and spoke, his voice low. "My mother says you are learning our ways quickly." Surprised to hear him speak in English, Miriam nodded. "I'm trying. Everyone has been kind, especially you." "Not everyone is kind?" he said, his face growing serious. "There is trouble coming." "What kind of trouble?" "The cavalry has been moving closer to our territory, and there is talk in town that you have been kidnapped." Miriam's stomach tightened with fear. "But that's not true. I came willingly." "Truth matters little to those who seek reasons for war," To-ya said bitterly. "My brother's blood was not enough for them." "Tell me about your brother," Miriam said gently, sensing his grief. To-ya was silent for a long moment, staring into the dying fire. "He was brave and strong. He was to be chief after my father. When the soldiers came, he stood before them unarmed, asking for peace." His hand tightened around the flute. "They shot him where he stood." Miriam reached for his hand, covering it with her own. "I'm so sorry." "You are not like them," To-ya said, turning his hand to clasp hers. You saw me as a man, not an enemy. Because that's what you are, she said simply. They sat together in silence until the fire was nothing but embers. When Toya finally spoke again, his voice was resolute. I will protect you, Miriam Blake, from soldiers, from angry townsfolk, even from your father if he comes for you. And I will stand with your people, she promised, for however long you'll have me. The look he gave her then was full of meaning. The Apache do not give wedding sashes lightly. Miriam touched the sash she still wore daily. In my world, there are many steps before marriage. And in mine, there is seeing truly, then choosing, then belonging, he countered. I have seen you truly, Miriam. I have chosen. The belonging is for you to decide. Before she could respond, a cry went up from the edge of camp. A scout raced in on horseback, calling out in Apache. The camp erupted into activity, warriors grabbing weapons, women gathering children. What is it? Miriam asked, alarmed. Toya's face had hardened into a mask of determination. Riders coming! White men! He pulled her to her feet. Stay with my mother. I must go. As he turned to leave, Miriam caught his arm. Toya, wait. He paused, looking back at her with a question in his eyes. I have decided, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. I belong with you. For a brief moment, his stern expression softened. He touched her cheek once, quickly, then turned and ran toward his horse, joining the other warriors preparing to meet the approaching threat. Nijoni appeared at Miriam's side, her face grim. Come, she said, taking Miriam's arm. We must prepare. Your father rides with them. The Apache camp burst into organized chaos as warriors mounted their horses and women hurried children into hiding places. Nijoni pulled Miriam toward her wickiup, her grip firm and urgent. What will happen? Miriam asked, her heart pounding in her chest. They come with guns, Nizoni said grimly. They come for you. Inside the wickiup, Nizoni quickly gathered a few items, a knife, a small medicine pouch, and a water skin. She thrust them into Miriam's hands. If there is fighting, you run to the caves we showed you, she instructed. My son will find you there. I won't run, Miriam said, setting the items aside. This is because of me. I need to face them. Nijoni studied her face, then nodded slowly. You have the spirit of an Apache woman. She reached out and straightened Miriam's wedding sash. But remember, you are no longer just Miriam Blake. You are now one of us. Outside, they could hear the approaching riders. Miriam followed Nijoni to the edge of the camp where Toya and about 20 warriors had formed a line, their faces painted for battle, rifles and spears at the ready. The white men came into view, about 15 of them, led by Sheriff Wilson. Beside him rode Frank Blake, Miriam's father, his face flushed with anger or whiskey or both. They halted their horses about 50 yards from the Apache line. We've come for the Blake girl, the sheriff called out. Send her out and there won't be any trouble. Toya sat tall on his paint horse, his face impassive. He said nothing, making no move to comply. Frank Blake urged his horse forward a few steps. Miriam, he shouted, get out here, girl. These savages have addled your mind long enough. Miriam stepped forward, moving past the line of warriors to stand in plain view. She was conscious of how she must look to them, dressed in Apache clothing, her hair braided in the tribal style, the wedding sash prominently displayed at her waist. I'm here, Pa, she called back, but I'm not coming with you. A murmur ran through the white men. Her father's face darkened with rage. The hell you ain't! You're my daughter, and you're coming home right now. Home? Miriam laughed bitterly. You threw me out, remember? Said I was no daughter of yours. The sheriff moved his horse up beside Frank's. Miriam, these people are dangerous. Whatever they've told you, whatever they've promised you, it's not worth your life. Come back to town with us. No one blames you for what happened. I'm not being held against my will, Miriam said clearly, wanting everyone to hear. I chose to come here. I chose to stay. One of the men in the posse spat on the ground. She's gone native, Sheriff. Probably been forced into all sorts of heathen rituals. That's a lie, Miriam shouted. These people have shown me nothing but kindness and respect, more than I ever got in town. Her father dismounted, swaying slightly as his boots hit the ground. He'd been drinking just as she suspected. You listen to me, girl. Your mother would turn in her grave if she could see you now, living with Indians, dressed like a squaw. The cruel words stung, but Miriam stood her ground. Ma taught me to judge people by their actions, not by what others said about them. She would have understood. Understood what? That you've taken up with some Apache buck? Frank sneered, gesturing toward Toya. Is that what this is about? Toya dismounted in one fluid motion and came to stand beside Miriam. Without a word, he took her hand in his message to the white men unmistakable. Frank's face contorted with disgust. So it's true. My own flesh and blood laying down with a savage? That's enough, Frank, the sheriff said, looking uncomfortable. He turned to Miriam. Is this really what you want, girl? To turn your back on your own kind? My own kind? Miriam repeated. My own kind threw me out for showing basic human decency. My own kind would rather see a man die than offer him help. She squeezed Toya's hand. I've found where I belong. The standoff might have ended there, if not for Clyde Ricketts, a ranch hand known for his hot temper. He nudged his horse forward, his rifle raised. This ain't right, Sheriff, he growled. We can't just leave her here. These redskins have bewitched her somehow. Toya tensed beside Miriam, his free hand moving to the knife at his belt. Put that gun down, Ricketts, the sheriff ordered. We didn't come here to start a war. Didn't we? Ricketts challenged. Seems to me that's exactly what we came for. These Apache have been raiding cattle, stealing horses, and now they've taken one of our women. I say we teach them a lesson they won't forget. Several other men murmured in agreement, their hands moving to their weapons. The Apache warriors shifted, preparing for battle. Nijoni hurried the remaining women and children toward the rear of the camp. Stop this, Miriam cried, stepping forward. There doesn't need to be bloodshed today. But her words were drowned out by the sound of a gunshot. One of the nervous posse members had fired into the air, and chaos erupted. The Apache warriors raised their rifles. The white men scattered for cover. For a terrifying moment, it seemed a massacre was inevitable. Then a commanding voice rang out in Apache, followed by English, Hold your fire. Toya had moved to stand between the two groups, his arms raised. The warriors reluctantly lowered their weapons at his command. We do not want war, he said to the sheriff, his voice carrying across the tense space between them. But we will defend our people. Sheriff Wilson, who had taken cover behind his horse, slowly straightened up. Seems to me things have gotten out of hand, Chief. I am not Chief, Toya replied, but I speak for my people today. You came for Miriam Blake. She has told you her choice. Now you must respect it. Frank Blake pushed past the sheriff, his face twisted with fury. The hell I will. She's my daughter. A daughter you cast out, Toya reminded him. A daughter you shamed for showing mercy. That was different, Frank sputtered. I was angry. I'd been drinking. And now? Are you not angry? Have you not been drinking? Toya asked, his voice calm but pointed. Frank had no answer for that. He looked at Miriam, really looked at her perhaps for the first time in years. Your mother loved you, girl. She wouldn't want you living like this. My mother loved me enough to want me happy, Miriam replied softly. I'm happy here, Pa. For the first time since she died, I found a place where I matter. A flicker of something, regret perhaps or shame, crossed Frank's weathered face. He looked down at the ground, then back at his daughter. You really want to stay with these people? With him? He jerked his head toward Toya. Yes, Miriam said without hesitation. I do. Frank's shoulders slumped. For a moment he looked old and defeated. Then his expression hardened again. Then you're no daughter of mine. Don't ever try to come back. He turned and stumbled back to his horse. The sheriff watched him go, then looked back at Miriam and Toya. This isn't over, he warned. The army's been looking for an excuse to move against you folks. They hear about a white woman living among the Apache. They might just find the excuse they've been waiting for. I'm not being held here, Miriam insisted. I'll sign a paper saying so if you want. The sheriff shook his head. Won't make much difference to the army. They see things in black and white. He tipped his hat to her. Be careful, Miriam. You've made your bed, but it might turn out to be a dangerous place to sleep. With that, he turned his horse and led the remaining men back toward town. Frank Blake didn't look back even once as he rode away. The confrontation had ended without bloodshed, but as Miriam watched her father disappear over the ridge, she felt a strange mix of relief and loss. The last tie to her old life had been severed. Toya stood beside her until the dust from the riders had settled. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "There is still time to change your mind." Miriam turned to face him. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." That night, the tribe held a special ceremony. Miriam sat in a place of honor beside Nijoni as the elders spoke blessings over her. Though she couldn't understand all the words, she felt their weight and importance. Nijoni translated the most significant parts. "They say you have the courage of Wind Woman, who faced the storm spirits without fear. They accept you as one of the people." After the ceremony, there was food and music. The tension of the day gave way to celebration as the tribe affirmed Miriam's place among them. Women who had been standoffish now offered her food and smiles. Children darted around her, no longer shy. Later, as the celebration continued, Toya led Miriam away from the fires to a quiet spot beneath the stars. He had brought a blanket, which he spread on the ground. "In my tribe," he said, sitting and inviting her to join him, "when a man and woman decide to walk the same path, they sit beneath the stars and share their true names and stories." Miriam sat beside him, her heart beating fast. "I don't have many stories worth telling." "All stories have worth," Toya replied. "Tell me of your mother." So Miriam spoke of Sarah Blake, a gentle woman who had loved wildflowers and poetry, who had taught her daughter to find beauty even in harsh places. She told him how her mother had died during a fever that swept through town 3 winters ago, and how her father had retreated into a bottle afterward. "She would have liked you," Miriam concluded. "She always said the measure of a person was in their actions, not their words." Toya smiled at that. "A wise woman. Now I understand where your wisdom comes from." "Tell me your story," Miriam urged. "You know all of mine." Toya was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I was born during a great thunderstorm," he began. "The medicine man said this meant I would have the power to bridge worlds, the earth and sky, the seen and unseen." He touched the small medicine pouch he always wore around his neck. "When I was 10 winters, I nearly drowned in the river. For many days after, I could not speak. The elders said the river spirits had taken my voice in exchange for vision." "What kind of vision?" Miriam asked. "The ability to see people's hearts," he said simply. "When I first saw you standing in the moonlight with your stick raised to defend yourself, I saw your heart, brave and kind even when afraid." He took her hand in his. "That is why I trusted you to help me. That is why I came back for you." "And the wedding sash?" Miriam asked, touching the woven band at her waist. "What does it truly mean among your people?" "It means I have chosen you as my life's companion," Toya said. "It means I will hunt for you, fight for you, die for you if necessary." Miriam's breath caught in her throat. "Those are serious promises." "The Apache do not make promises lightly," he replied. "But the sash is also a question, not just a statement. It asks if you choose me in return." Under the vast desert sky, with the sounds of celebration in the distance, Miriam made her choice clear. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gesture from her world, not his, but one whose meaning couldn't be misunderstood. Toya's arms came around her, pulling her close as he returned the kiss with unexpected tenderness. When they finally parted, his eyes were bright with emotion. "My heart is yours, Miriam Blake," he said softly, as the stars belong to the night sky. "And mine is yours," she whispered back, "as surely as roses will bloom from the cuttings I've planted." They might have stayed there all night, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the stars, if not for the sudden appearance of Kassa, running toward them with panic in her eyes. "Toya!" she called. "Soldiers come! Many soldiers!" They sprang to their feet, the moment of peace shattered. In the distance, they could hear the rhythmic drumming of many horses approaching. "The cavalry," Toya said grimly. "Your father must have gone to them after leaving here." "But the sheriff said—" "The sheriff does not command the army," Toya cut her off, "and the army has wanted to move against us for many moons." He took her by the shoulders. "Miriam, you must go with Kassa. She will take you to the caves." "No," Miriam shook her head firmly. "I won't hide, I won't run." "This is not like before," he insisted, his voice urgent. These men will not stop to talk. They will shoot first and ask questions later. Then they'll have to shoot me too, Miriam declared, because I'm standing with you, with our people. Toya looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, decision made. Then we stand together. He took her hand, and together they ran back toward the camp to prepare for what was coming. The night that had begun with celebration was about to turn into something far darker. As Miriam ran beside the man she had chosen, she could only pray that the dawn would find them both still alive to see the sunrise. The Apache camp erupted into urgent activity as news of the approaching cavalry spread. Warriors grabbed rifles and ammunition, while women hurriedly packed essential belongings. Children were quickly gathered and led toward the back of the camp where they could be evacuated if necessary. Toya's face was grim as he strode into the center of the camp. "How many?" he asked a scout who had just ridden in. "At least 30 soldiers," the man replied in Apache, which Nijoni quickly translated for Miriam. "Captain Reynolds leads them. They have a cannon." A murmur of concern spread through the gathered tribe members. Miriam had heard of Captain Reynolds. His reputation for ruthlessness against the Apache was well known throughout the territory. "We must leave," one of the elders urged. "We cannot fight so many with a cannon." "There is no time," another warrior argued. "They are too close. We must stand and fight." Toya raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm but authoritative. "We will not abandon our home, but neither will we sacrifice our people in a battle we cannot win." He turned to the warriors. "Half will stay to defend the camp. The rest will escort the women, children, and elders to the high caves." His eyes found Miriam in the crowd. "Miriam, you must go with them. The soldiers will be less likely to attack if they see you safe and unharmed." "I told you, I'm staying with you," she insisted, moving to his side. "This is not your fight," he said, his voice gentler now. "It became my fight when I chose you," Miriam replied firmly. "These are my people now too." Nijoni stepped forward, a determined expression on her face. "My son is right about one thing. The soldiers may hesitate if they see a white woman, but he is wrong to think you should hide." She looked between them. "You should both go out to meet them. Together." "It's too dangerous," Toya protested. "Sometimes the greatest courage is to stand unarmed before your enemy," Nijoni said. "Did not your brother teach us this?" At the mention of his slain brother, Toya fell silent. After a moment he nodded, decision made. "We will try words before arrows, but," he added, turning to the warriors, "be ready if words fail." The sound of the approaching cavalry grew louder, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, the jingle of equipment. Miriam's heart raced, but she kept her face calm as she stood beside Toya at the edge of the camp. She wore her buckskin dress and the wedding sash, a deliberate statement of where her loyalties now lay. The cavalry appeared over the ridge, a line of blue uniforms and gleaming weapons. At their head rode Captain Reynolds, a tall man with a thick mustache and cold eyes. Behind him came the soldiers, and to Miriam's shock, her father rode with them, looking small and uncertain beside the military men. As Nijoni had predicted, the sight of Miriam standing openly beside Toya caused the captain to raise his hand, halting his men about 50 yards from the camp. "Miss Blake?" he called out, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "Yes," Miriam replied, stepping forward slightly. "I'm Captain James Reynolds of the United States Cavalry. We've come to rescue you from your captors and return you to civilization." "I'm not being held captive," Miriam said clearly. "I'm here by choice." The captain's eyes narrowed skeptically. "Your father tells a different story. Says these Apache took you against your will." Miriam glanced at her father, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "My father knows that's not true. The sheriff and his men were here yesterday. I told them the same thing. I chose to come here. I chose to stay." "Be that as it may," Reynolds said, his tone dismissive. "We have orders to clear this illegal encampment. These Apache are occupying land designated for white settlement." "This is ancestral Apache land," Toya spoke up, his voice strong and clear. "We have lived here for generations before any white man came." "The government doesn't recognize your claim," Reynolds replied coldly. You have 1 hour to pack up and move on, or we'll be forced to remove you." Miriam felt a surge of anger. "You mean you'll attack a peaceful settlement? There are children here." "That's why I'm giving them a chance to leave," the captain said, "though I'd be within my rights to arrest the lot of them for kidnapping." "But I wasn't kidnapped," Miriam exclaimed in frustration. Reynolds ignored her protest. 1 hour, he repeated, then turned his horse to rejoin his men who had already begun to set up the small cannon. As the captain rode away, Frank Blake remained, looking uncertainly at his daughter. "Pa," Miriam said, walking closer to him. "You know I wasn't taken by force. Why would you tell them that?" Frank shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "It was the only way to get them to come," he admitted. I thought once you saw them, you'd come to your senses." "My senses are just fine," Miriam said. "I've made my choice." "How you don't understand what you're doing, girl," Frank insisted, lowering his voice. "Reynolds has been looking for an excuse to move against the Apache for months. He doesn't care about you. He cares about clearing Indians off this land." "Then why did you bring him here?" Miriam demanded. Frank had no good answer. He looked down at his hands on the reins. "I want you home," he said finally, his voice smaller than she'd ever heard it. "I've been a poor excuse for a father since your mother died, I know that, but you're all I have left of her." The naked honesty in his words caught Miriam by surprise. For a moment, she saw not the angry drunk who had thrown her out, but a broken man who had lost his way when grief took the love of his life. "Pa," she said gently, "I can't come back. Not now. This is where I belong." "With him?" Frank jerked his head toward Toya, who stood watching them from a respectful distance. "Yes," Miriam said simply. "With him." Frank looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. "You look like your mother when she was young," he said softly. "Same stubborn chin, same fire in your eyes when you've made up your mind." "She taught me to follow my heart," Miriam said. "That's what I'm doing." Frank nodded slowly, then straightened in his saddle. "Then I reckon I've got some explaining to do to Captain Reynolds." He turned his horse. "Don't you worry. I'll set him straight about the kidnapping business." "Will he listen?" Miriam asked doubtfully. Frank's face hardened with determination. "He damn well better. I may be just a broken-down old drunk, but I'm still a white man in this territory. That counts for something." As he rode back toward the cavalry line, Toya came to stand beside Miriam. "What did he say?" "He's going to tell them the truth, that I wasn't kidnapped," Miriam replied, watching her father approach the captain. "But I don't think it will matter. Reynolds wants this land." "Then we must be ready," Toya said grimly. They watched as Frank engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Captain Reynolds. The captain's face grew increasingly red as Frank gesticulated forcefully. Finally, Reynolds shoved Frank aside and barked orders to his men, who began to move the cannon into position. "It didn't work," Miriam said, her heart sinking. Toya took her hand. It was brave of him to try. Back at the Apache camp, preparations for both defense and evacuation continued. Women loaded travois with supplies, while warriors took up positions behind rocks and wickiups. Nijoni organized the children, showing remarkable calm as she directed the oldest ones to lead the youngest toward the back trails. "You should go with them," Toya told Miriam. "If there is fighting—" "I told you, I'm staying," she interrupted firmly. "But I have an idea." She explained quickly, and after a moment's hesitation, Toya nodded his agreement. As the cavalry's 1-hour ultimatum neared its end, Miriam walked alone toward the line of soldiers. She carried no weapon, and she had removed her wedding sash so that she appeared more as they would expect, a white woman in a simple dress. "Captain Reynolds," she called as she approached. "I'd like to speak with you." Reynolds rode forward to meet her, eyeing her suspiciously. "Come to your senses, have you, Miss Blake?" "I want to avoid bloodshed," Miriam said. "There's no need for anyone to die today." "That's entirely up to these Apache," Reynolds replied coldly. "They can leave peacefully or we can remove them. Those are the only options." "There's a third option," Miriam said, "one that would let you return to the fort successful without firing a shot." This caught the captain's attention. I'm listening. The tribe is willing to move their main camp to the North Ridge, Miriam explained. It's still their traditional territory, but it's outside the boundary line you're concerned with. Why would I agree to that when I can simply drive them off completely? Reynolds asked skeptically. Because forcing them off their land entirely will only lead to raids and attacks later, Miriam reasoned. They'll be desperate with nothing to lose, but if they can keep some of their ancestral grounds, they'll have reason to maintain peace. Reynolds considered this, twisting the end of his mustache thoughtfully. And what does the army get from this arrangement? You can report that you successfully cleared the designated settlement areas without firing a shot, Miriam said. No casualties to explain, no widows to compensate, no grieving mothers. Just a successful, peaceful resolution that makes you look like both an effective commander and a humanitarian. She could see the idea appealed to him. Captain Reynolds was ambitious. Everyone knew he had his eye on promotion. How do I know they'll keep their word? He asked. The same way they'll know you'll keep yours, Miriam replied. Trust has to start somewhere, Captain. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. You speak well for a rancher's daughter, he observed. And you seem to have developed quite an affinity for these people. I've learned that they're not so different from us, Miriam said. They want to live in peace, raise their children, and keep their traditions alive. Is that so wrong? The captain didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, And what about you, Miss Blake? Will you be returning to town, or? He left the question hanging. Miriam stood straight and met his gaze. My place is with the Apache now, with To-Ya. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. I see. Well, that's your choice, I suppose, though many would call it a poor one. He sighed heavily. Very well. I'll accept your proposal, with one condition. The Apache must send 2 of their men to the fort as, let's call them ambassadors, to ensure compliance. It was a demand for hostages, thinly disguised. Miriam hesitated. I'll need to discuss this with the tribal council. Of course, Reynolds said with false graciousness. You have 15 minutes. Miriam hurried back to the camp, where To-Ya and the elders waited anxiously. She quickly explained the captain's counteroffer. He wants hostages, To-Ya said, anger flashing in his eyes. Yes, Miriam admitted, but it might be the only way to avoid bloodshed today. The elders conferred briefly in Apache, their faces grave. Finally, Nijoni spoke. We will agree, but with our own condition. You, Miriam, will act as our representative in these talks. The captain seems to listen to you. And I will go to the fort, To-Ya added firmly. No, Miriam protested. It's too dangerous. It must be me, To-Ya insisted. I will not ask another to take this risk. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Miriam knew arguing would be futile. Then I'm coming with you, she said. No, Nijoni interjected. You are needed here to help our people move camp and to maintain communication with the white authorities. She placed a hand on Miriam's arm. Trust my son to return to you, as you returned to him. With a heavy heart, Miriam returned to Captain Reynolds and delivered their response. The captain seemed pleased with the arrangement, particularly when she mentioned that To-Ya would be one of the ambassadors. Excellent, he said. We'll withdraw now and give your people time to relocate. The ambassadors should report to Fort Lowell by sundown tomorrow. As the cavalry prepared to leave, Frank Blake rode over to where Miriam stood. He looked tired, but somehow more clear-eyed than she had seen him in years. You did good, girl, he said awkwardly. Your mother would be proud. Thank you, Pa, Miriam said, surprised by the compliment. Frank cleared his throat. Listen, I know I've been no kind of father to you lately. The drinking, the anger, it wasn't right. Your mother would have clouted me good for the way I treated you. Pa, you don't have to... No, let me finish, he insisted. I was wrong to throw you out, wrong about a lot of things. He gestured toward the Apache camp. I don't understand your choice, but it's yours to make. Miriam felt tears prick her eyes. That means a lot, Pa. Frank shifted uncomfortably, unused to emotional conversations. Well, anyway, if you ever need anything, the cabin door's open to you, and your, husband too, I suppose. Before Miriam could respond, he turned his horse and rode off to join the departing cavalry. She watched him go, a bittersweet feeling in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, or reconciliation, but it was a start. The next day was a flurry of activity as the tribe broke camp and moved to the North Ridge. It was higher ground, with a better view of the surrounding territory, but water was scarcer. Still, it was better than fighting a battle they couldn't win. As evening approached, Miriam stood with Toya at the edge of the new camp. He was dressed in his finest buckskin shirt, his hair neatly braided, ready to present himself at the fort. "I don't like this," Miriam said, adjusting his collar needlessly. "Reynolds can't be trusted." "Few men can," Toya replied with a small smile. "But sometimes we must take risks for peace." "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Promise me you'll come back." Toya pulled her close. "I will always come back to you, Miriam Blake, even if I must cross between worlds to do so." He kissed her then, a lingering kiss that held both promise and farewell. When they parted, he placed something in her hand, a small wooden carving of a rose. "To remind you of new life from old," he said, "until I return." Miriam watched him ride away with the other ambassador, a respected elder named Nakohe. The two men made dignified figures as they crossed the scrubland toward Fort Lowell, their backs straight, their heads held high. The days that followed were among the hardest Miriam had ever known. She threw herself into helping establish the new camp, working alongside the women to set up wiki-ups and plant new gardens. She showed them how to create catch basins to gather what little rain fell, and how to find the underground streams that ran beneath certain types of vegetation. Each night, she sat with Nijoni by the fire, watching the trail from the fort, hoping to see Toya returning. Each night, her hopes were disappointed. A week passed, then two. Worry began to gnaw at Miriam's heart. Had Reynolds gone back on his word? Were Toya and Nakohe being mistreated, or worse? Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Miriam decided to take action. She asked Casa to accompany her into town to gather information. Tucson had never seemed so hostile as it did when Miriam rode in with Casa at her side. People stopped to stare, women pulled their children closer, men reached for weapons. Miriam kept her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed them down the dusty main street. She headed for the general store where the owner, Mr. Peterson, had always been kind to her mother. As she tied her horse outside, the door opened and Sheriff Wilson stepped out. "Well, well," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Miriam Blake, didn't expect to see you back in town." "I'm looking for information," she said directly, "about the Apache men who were sent to Fort Lowell." The sheriff's expression grew serious. "You'd better come inside." In the privacy of the store's back room, the sheriff shared what he knew. Reynolds has been keeping them at the fort, claiming they're cooperating with an investigation into cattle raids. But word is, he's just holding them to make sure the tribe stays put. "That wasn't the agreement," Miriam said angrily. "Agreements with Indians don't mean much to men like Reynolds," the sheriff replied with a shrug. "I don't like it either, but there's not much I can do. Military jurisdiction." "There must be someone who can help," Miriam insisted. "The Indian agent, perhaps." "Agent Harris," the sheriff snorted. "He's more interested in lining his pockets than helping anyone." Miriam felt despair threatening to overwhelm her. Then a new voice joined the conversation. "I might be able to help." Frank Blake stood in the doorway, looking sober and determined. He had shaved and wore clean clothes, a startling change from the disheveled drunk Miriam remembered. "Pa," she said in surprise. "I've been doing some thinking," Frank said, coming to stand beside her. "About what your mother would want, about the kind of man I used to be before—" He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "Anyway, I know some people at the territorial office in Phoenix, people who might be interested to hear about a cavalry captain exceeding his orders and potentially stirring up trouble with peaceful Indians." Hope flickered in Miriam's heart. "You'd do that?" "For my daughter?" "Yes," Frank said simply. "It's past time I stood up for you, instead of against you." 2 days later, a territorial official arrived at Fort Lowell, accompanied by Frank Blake and Sheriff Wilson. By sunset, Toya and Nakohe were released, tired but unharmed. and Captain Reynolds was facing an official reprimand. When Toya rode into the Apache camp that night, Miriam ran to meet him, heedless of propriety or tradition. He swung down from his horse and caught her in his arms, holding her as if he never intended to let go. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised I would," he replied, stroking her hair. "And I had help." He looked over her shoulder to where Frank Blake sat awkwardly on his horse, hanging back from the reunion. Miriam turned and saw her father. She went to him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Pa." Frank dismounted stiffly. "Wasn't just me. Your fella there impressed that territorial official something fierce, spoke better English than half the soldiers, knew the law better too." He glanced at Toya with newfound respect. "Reckon I might have been wrong about some things." That night, a feast was held to celebrate the return of Toya and Nakohe. To everyone's surprise, Frank stayed, sitting somewhat uncomfortably by the fire, accepting the food offered to him with awkward thanks. As the stars came out and the celebration continued around them, Toya led Miriam away from the fires to the same quiet spot where they had shared their stories before the cavalry came. This time, he carried a small bundle wrapped in soft hide. "While I was at the fort," he said, "I had time to think about many things, about bridges between worlds, about the future." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal something that made Miriam gasp, a simple gold ring. "The sutler at the fort traded with me," Toya explained. "In my world, we exchange wedding sashes, in yours rings. I thought perhaps we could honor both traditions." Tears filled Miriam's eyes as she understood what he was asking. "Are you proposing to me, Toya, in the white man's way?" He nodded, taking her hand. "Miriam Blake, you gave me life when you found me bleeding in the dirt. You gave me hope when you chose to stay. Now I ask if you will give me your future, as I give you mine." "Yes," she whispered, her heart too full for more words. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then wrapped the wedding sash around both their joined hands, binding them together in the traditions of both their worlds. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the celebration, the laughter of children, the low conversation between Frank Blake and Nijoni, as two parents from different worlds found common ground in their love for their children. Spring came early that year. As the first warm days arrived, Miriam led Toya to the small plot near their wickiup, where she had planted the rose cuttings months before. New green shoots were pushing up through the soil, promising blooms to come. "New life from old," Toya said, remembering his words from the carving he had given her. "Just like us," Miriam replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Something beautiful growing in unlikely soil." Together they stood, watching as the sun set over the land that had seen so much conflict, but now, perhaps, might know a measure of peace. Not perfect peace. There would always be men like Reynolds, always be misunderstandings and prejudices to overcome, but a beginning. Like the roses that would soon bloom in the desert, their love had taken root against all odds. And like the silent river that gave Toya his name, it would continue to flow powerful and deep, carving its own path through whatever landscape it encountered. As twilight deepened around them, Miriam thought of her mother's words, spoken long ago. "Love, real love, builds bridges where none existed before." Looking up at Toya's face, at the future they would build together, Miriam knew that bridge was already strong enough to carry them wherever their path might lead.